Really two things I would highlight. First, we want people to understand that America's problem isn't deficits and debt. That's the symptom of the problem. The underlying problem is that government is growing too fast. I have this thing that I call Mitchell's Golden Rule. I named it after myself because I was so jealous of Art Laffer for having the Laffer curve. But set aside the fact that I put my name on it, the Golden Rule is simply that government should grow slower than the private sector. And unfortunately today, the lines are reversed. Government is growing faster than the private sector, and if that continues over time, that's inevitably a recipe for higher taxes. But even more important than that, it's a recipe for government consuming more of the private sector, crowding out entrepreneurship, crowding out growth, crowding out jobs. So get Washington, especially some of our friends in Washington, get them to understand that the problem is government spending, and deficits and debt are simply the symptom of too much government spending. And then, once we get them to understand that, the second half of in effect, the role that we try to help fill is pursuing the right solution. See, I don't think the right solution is a balanced budget amendment. I mean, I've written in favor of a balanced budget amendment. I've debated in favor of it. It's certainly not a bad idea, but a much better option would be what they have in Switzerland, what they have in Hong Kong, which is a constitutional limit on the growth of government. And here's my simple 30-second explanation of it. There are balanced budget requirements in California, Illinois, and New Jersey. Does that stop them from overspending? No. There are these so-called Maastricht rules controlling deficits in Europe. Does that stop Greece and France and Italy from overspending? No. In other words, I don't think balanced budget rules, anti-deficit rules work very well, because what do politicians do? They say, oh, we're forced to raise taxes. The beauty of the Swiss and Hong Kong spending caps is that they actually address the real underlying problem, which is government growing too fast. So I'm trying to convince people, yes, balanced budget amendment, not a bad idea, but you know what's an even better idea? A spending limit amendment. That's the real solution. You look around the world, the spending limits work, the balanced budget amendments don't really work.
So you'd say we don't have that quite yet here in the US. We have no spending amendments. We just have that spending caps, which we are very much known for bursting through, and the ceiling and all that.
Yeah, no, if you take a look at the entire federal budget, back in 2011, we did put in a spending cap, but that spending cap applied to just about 25% of the budget. And as you pointed out, the politicians keep busting the spending caps. Because if you're a fox, why would you want a lock on the hen house? If you're a prisoner, why would you want locks on the jail? So of course the politicians in Washington love busting the spending caps. You know what? Why they get away with that? Because they're legislative spending caps. If you actually had a constitutional provision, they wouldn't be able to get away with that. And so that's one of the reasons, among many, why I think this Hong Kong, Switzerland style spending limit is really, assuming we actually want to solve the problem, which at least we do, maybe not some of our friends on Capitol Hill, but for those of us in the free market, pro-taxpayer community, we actually want to solve the problem, and I think the best way of solving the problem is a spending limit amendment. And oh, by the way, you do a spending limit amendment, and what happens, like in Hong Kong and Switzerland, you get rid of deficits. I mean, all across Europe, what's been happening to red ink? It's going up and up and up and up. What's been happening in Switzerland with the spending limit amendment? Red ink's been going down, down, down. And Hong Kong has no government debt at all. Matter of fact, they have more than a year's worth of reserves. They could, in effect, collect no revenue for more than a year and still have a balanced budget or a budget surplus, because they have all this money, in effect, sitting in the bank because their economy is so healthy and they've been so good, thanks to their Article 107 of their basic law, they're so good about controlling the growth of government.
So you mentioned some international examples, but do you know of any states that have some really good fiscal policies that have really helped grow their local economies that we might look towards?
Great question, because we do have one state.
Only one.
Sadly, only one, but Colorado, the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, as it's called, is actually a spending cap. It's actually, technically, it's a limit on how much revenue can grow. Basically, I think population plus inflation. But when you mix a revenue cap with a balanced budget requirement, the combination of those two things gives you a spending limit. And so Colorado has had this very successful, very good spending limit called TABOR. The pro-spending lobbies in Colorado hate it. They're always trying to repeal it. As a matter of fact, they did have what was called a TABOR timeout last decade, where they were able to, in effect, get a 5-year period, I think it was, where the TABOR didn't apply. So TABOR is still there. It's back in effect, but it's still under assault. People, as I said, whether it's the education lobbies, the transportation lobbies, all the different special interest groups in Colorado hate TABOR because TABOR, in effect, puts government on a diet. And the last thing spending lobbies want, the last thing politicians want, is government on a diet.
They might starve to death, that's why.
Well, but here's the thing about whether it's TABOR or whether it's Switzerland or Hong Kong, these spending limits aren't very onerous. They basically say government can grow 2 to 3% a year. Now, what's unreasonable about that? I mean, that should be more than enough money. It basically lets government grow a little bit faster than inflation. But coming back to my golden rule, these spending limits don't let government grow faster than the private sector of the economy. And again, that, in my mind, is the most important goal for good fiscal policy.